Good Tuesday afternoon, everybody. I'm Danilo Evangelista, and welcome to the Hurricane Hub discussion for Tuesday, May 16th, 2023. Second discussion of this tracking season. And as you notice by the title card, I did say potential for development in the Atlantic. And this is not really something big, but it's something that some people have been talking about on the models, so we'll go over it today in a little bit. But first of all, I want to start off with what's going on the National Hurricane Center page. And as I did say, it's really only on the models as of right now, and it's actually within short range too. But we'll go over the logistics on that a little bit. But first of all, once again, reiterating nothing for the NHC right now in the next 7 days in the Atlantic, and then in the Pacific too. And then we look at the 2-day outlook as well. Nothing going on there. Really quick though, if this is going to load, there we go. This is in the southwestern Indian Ocean. This is Cyclone Fabian, and this is a major strength tropical cyclone. Yes, it is, and it is May there. And by the way, May is actually the off season, so May is kind of like our December in the Atlantic, and they're getting a major in the off season, which is pretty rare, and it's also at a pretty close to a pretty northerly latitude for this time of year there. It's, I believe, somewhere around 7 north or so, which is very close to the equator, and of course for there it's at a northerly latitude because it's the southern hemisphere. But still, very strong storm, and I believe this will probably get a little stronger, or maybe not. It's right now a Category 3, and once again, this is from the CIMS Tropical Cyclones website, a website that I once again said I really like, and you should definitely check it out. But of course, right now it is, 100 knots. So this is exactly the strength of a Category 3 storm in the Atlantic, and it remains that way. It does actually strengthen a little bit to 105 knots, so it could potentially get stronger than it already is strong, which is very interesting. And it always just goes to show that even when there's not activity in the Atlantic or Eastern Pacific, there always will be activity somewhere. So that is something to point out. But of course, taking a look at what's going on right now across the Atlantic, nothing yet. By the way, yesterday there was actually officially a tropical wave that did move off the coast of Africa. I think it was a little bit late in the game to really talk about it. I think they verified it after I posted my video yesterday, but still, there was a wave that came off the coast of Africa, a very weak one, probably embedded in the ITCZ now today. And of course, it is May, so these waves are going to be weak for now. Since there really is not much going for activity in the deep tropics. It's still May, and it's not August yet, so we still have a long way to go. And that's very evident. A lot of low-level clouds and a lot of strong upper-level wind shear, so obviously nothing is going to get going just yet. But hey, this is interesting. Danny Morris did mention, and I think this is really piggybacking off what I've been saying for the last few weeks about El Nino. He says in the long range European, this is the EPS ensemble. And we'll go over which one is which in a little bit. The control sort of looks like the long range GFS, which goes gangbusters with westerly wind bursts in the Pacific in the second half of June, but there's a lack of East Pacific rising cell in the mean. So basically the second part, this part that we were just talking about, he's referring to this, the EPS, the European Ensemble control forecast for the MJO and the velocity potential. And a lot of these greens, which he's denoting, is Eastern Pacific, closer towards South America, rising motion. And he mentions that the European is showing a lot of westerly wind bursts in the ensemble forecast towards mid-June, and this is in correlation with that. But on the other hand, in the mean, this is the mean, this is the ensemble mean, there's a lack of that MJO and much more of a not a sinking cell in the Eastern Pacific, but a lack of a rising cell. And I believe this really piggybacks off my idea of needing to watch how the atmosphere plays out in the development of this El Nino, because at least from what we're seeing here, in a particularly, I would say, ideal year. Sorry for Discord, it's going off. I have Discord in the back. I'm just going to close that for now. But what I was saying, in a typically ideal year, what we would tend to have is rising motion that's more or less centered. I'm going to show you right here. By the way, if you don't know what I'm referring to with this graph, this is a longitude graph of the whole entire globe, and this is over an average of, let's see right here, 15 south to 15 north. So basically what you're looking at is the MJO from 15 south to 15 north over the entire equator of the whole entire globe. So typically we would have some sort of rising motion in the eastern Pacific, or maybe centered somewhere right here in the central Pacific, and notice that there's a cell of rising motion in the western Pacific but lacking in the eastern Pacific, and that is more or less not really that much of a strong El Nino indication. So what I've been saying is we need to watch this really closely, because I will say if this does persist, maybe we'll have to start looking a lot more towards a slower developing El Nino than a strong, quick developing El Nino. And that'll be a very big factor, especially for the Atlantic, which is obviously very warm. And then we also have, of course, the factor of we were all forecasting a very strong El Nino just weeks ago. Many people were agreeing on that. And now we have all these models kind of shifting their course a little bit. It's very interesting. But for now, we take a look at the SOI, and why not bring this up? The latest 30-day average is at 6 points, as you see right here. 6 points for the 30-day average on the SOI, and the 90-day average is once again now below zero. It's at negative 1.87 points. So whether or not we're seeing a slow or a fast developing El Nino, there still will be El Nino either way. It definitely does look like the atmosphere is on that path towards getting towards El Nino eventually, so we don't really have to talk about whether or not we'll get El Nino or not at all. We're pretty certain that it will come, but once again, the question, how strong and how fast? Moving towards the Atlantic, though, this is a look at the Gulf of Mexico sea surface temperatures. We talk about usually the anomalies, which is where we see the reds and the blues. Those are the departure from normal. This is the actual sea surface temperature graph of the actual sea surface temperatures in the Atlantic, and this is the Gulf of Mexico. This is the 27 degrees Celsius line right here, right to the central Gulf, and you kind of see how that kind of chokes up from the Caribbean like that. This is all associated with the loop current, and this is something that we'll also watch throughout the season, because sometimes developing storms in the Gulf, when they tend to go over these loop currents, it really does kind of help give a boost, and sometimes we get really strong storms from the loop currents. So that'll be something interesting to watch. But 27 degrees Celsius now stretching all the way up into the central Gulf. Most of the Gulf by now is at 26 degrees Celsius, except for a few patches, of course, in the northern Gulf, but that'll warm up in the coming weeks. But look at this, by Louisiana and by the central Gulf Coast, you see those 27s, and is that 28 right by the coast? The shelf water, is that? Yeah, I think so. Anyway, that doesn't really matter, because it is right by the coast, and usually we would want to see development out here. That's where tropical cyclones really get it, in the open ocean, not right by the shelf, not by the shelf water. Usually that's not the case. But anyways, the bottom line, the Gulf is warming up, and typically always the Gulf will warm up by the time we get to August or September to levels that'll pretty much be sustainable for strong tropical development anyway. So the Gulf sea surface temperatures is really not something to really worry about. But let's take a look at then off the southeast coast, and you do see still the same thing, 26 degrees Celsius stretching up along the southeast coast. This is a little bit colder though, especially this year compared to recent years, because if you've seen the anomalies that we've been talking about, much colder subtropics this year, but we still have 26, 27 degrees Celsius right by the South Carolina coast, and this will also warm up too. As we get into summer, we'll see the 26 degrees Celsius line kind of stretch to the coast, and in turn we'll probably get, some nice beach weather there, obviously, and also this will help as we get closer in the season, probably help us facilitate when it comes to development of tropical systems. And speaking of that, by the title I did say there is something potentially on the models, and by the way, in this region too, off the southeast coast, and the waters there are somewhat warm enough, at least warm enough for some sort of development to occur. And we could take a look at that by the GFS not really anything going on from hour 2, out from days 1 to 2. But once we get towards around 60 hours, some sort of front that comes off the East Coast. Of course, the dying end of the front is what tends to happen with these systems, especially this time of year. Off the East Coast, you do notice there's actually some sort of piece of energy. And then right there, off the North Carolina coastline, hour 78 on the GFS. This is by the way the 12Z run. Notice that bona fide signature of vorticity. And by the way, throughout the season, when it comes to the development of these tropical systems, this is actually something that you do somewhat kind of want to look for: a closed off isobar with very potent vorticity as well. So if this were to actually be a signal of something, it definitely is a noticeable signal on that the GFS is showing, and then it kind of moves off the South Carolina coast. Does, I think, go over the Outer Banks, and then it moves off into the Atlantic, and then we're at hour 120. Then why not go to 70? Why not go to, I think, the next 7 days? That's the next 7 days right there. 1 hour 168. Something else that also tries to get going off I guess some more energy, but definitely not as defined as what we have much closer in time on the GFS. And this is definitely interesting, and this is bringing up talks, but it is bringing up talks, and it definitely would be something interesting if it weren't for the European. If we go to that, and this is the 12Z run as of right now at least, and take a look at that on the European, they also have something, but it really is not as defined. And actually, I'll just go to the 60 and see what it has there, since that's loaded the most. You really see that the 60 is not really as well defined, kind of stays right by the coast, does try to develop a little bit, but it really does not have as much of a potent signature in order to stay as close. And this is causing a lot of people to potentially talk about, well, I guess maybe part of the reason, but also another part is people talking about potential convective bias in the GFS. This is not anything new. This is something that's been well known for years, actually. Potentially some sort of convective bias in the GFS, which is maybe why they show a little bit something more potent on this. But nonetheless, I will say this is mid-May, May 20th, that this is occurring, and of course along the Gulf Stream off the southeast coast. Usually this time of year, something does try to tend to get going. And of course we have the Gulf Stream waters, which is warm water coming from the Caribbean along the loop current and then up to the southeast like that. That's all part of the Gulf. That's all part of the Gulf Stream. So maybe we might get something to develop. I don't know, but of course, bearing in mind that there's some sort of convective bias in the GFS, that sometimes it tends to happen. We have to keep that in mind, of course, with talking about potential development in the Atlantic, or in a situation specifically like this. But since we're on the model, why not take a look at what's going on the Eastern Pacific? And really not much. Let's just go all the way to 7 days, and really there's nothing. Maybe that small little area of vorticity, maybe that tries to do something over the next few days. I don't know. And let's extend it past that to June 1st. And yes, the model does actually go to June 1st now. Kind of cool. The GFS hour 384 is now on June 1st. So definitely another sign that hurricane season is almost here, at least in the Atlantic. The Eastern Pacific has started yesterday, if you've not seen yesterday's video. But either way, hurricane season is basically here. We're getting close. If that's not a thing to kind of, I don't want to say rub it in your face, but kind of remind you, as a reminder that we're getting close. If that's not anything yet, then I don't know. But we're definitely getting close to the season, bottom line. But still, on the next 7 days, it seems like nothing to worry about in the Eastern Pacific, though of course, as I did say, it does take some time a little bit for things to respond, and we'll probably, surely within the next few weeks, get something in the Eastern Pacific very soon. But of course it is May and it's still severe weather season, so why not talk about a little severe weather. Enhanced risk today for portions of the southeast. Severe thunderstorm watch issued with that. It's an enhanced risk. Where is that? Over the Carolinas and I think Tennessee, the southeast, you get what I mean. Tornado risk at 5%, so maybe we'll watch for tornadoes. Wind and hail is also an issue, but the wind seems to be the biggest issue. That's for day 1. Day 2, marginal risk, nothing to worry about there. And day 3, there's another marginal risk for Texas, but I just saw a little snippet right now. There you go. Day 4, 15% chance for something over Texas, Louisiana, and the South Central United States, basically. 15% usually more or less in line with slight risk for severe weather, so maybe something tries to cook up then, not spin up, because we're not talking about the tropics, but you get what I mean. And then going on after that, nothing really in the forecasts then, but nonetheless, there's still something forecasted over the next week or so, expected since it's May, but of course, as we get closer towards June and July, severe weather in the southeast will die down, and more or less we'll probably get to humid and hot weather over the southeast. And by the way, piggybacking off the Gulf of Mexico SSTs, we'll probably see those warm up in response to that occurring. But really, don't worry about the Gulf. That's typically always warm by the time we get to August or September. So really nothing to worry about then. But other than that, not much going on. We'll of course watch the GFS, and if anything does pop up, I'll mention it. But other than that, it is May, and even if this doesn't develop, it's fine because it's only May and we're not even still in the official start of the hurricane season yet. And no matter what, development will probably come sooner or later anyway, no matter what occurs with this. But that is it for now. If you like what you saw today, as I always say, hit the subscribe button. As the big famous people on YouTube, the gamers, say, smash it, destroy it, explode it, burst it, whatever. Just like, subscribe, share it with family and friends, kind of keep this community growing. That's very important. And enjoy the rest of your day. We'll see you back tomorrow.